Hi everyone, this is chapter 11 highlights, and I'm going to go through the book and tell you where I have some stars and underlines and highlights, but I also think I have the PDF of copies of the pages so you can see. Um, Page 97 is where the chapter starts. On page 99, right in the left-hand column, where it says diagnosis and settings, right in the middle of the column. Um, it begins pretty early in the chapter talking about um, working in the NICU. And so there's a few things I wanted to say about that. Um, it's really important for every OT that works in a NICU to realize that the medical staff, the doctors and nurses, have a primary concern for the infant, which is survival through this really what can be a very medically unstable period. So the OTs and PTs, who often do much the same thing in the NICU setting, um, will be primarily concerned about development after the stay in the NICU. So the OTs are looking at noise levels, lighting, trying to give recommendations for how to make the environment more hospitable, more nurturing for the preemie, and also looking at positioning of the infant because there's so many tubes and IV lines that are going in that the baby sometimes has to be positioned in very awkward uh, postures that are not conducive to development of muscle control and muscle movements. So they'll have recommendations and sometimes actually um, be involved in trying to develop positioning devices and supports for the infant. Another area of focus for OT in this setting is developing the sucking response and working with new mothers or mothers of the infant on nursing and bonding. So it's mentioned in the chapter like this is no big deal, but this is actually a really complicated and involved area of practice, not something new grads typically walk right into. Although some new grads have had a fieldwork experience in that setting. Um, the second column on page 99 mentions cerebral palsy as one of the diagnoses that OTs work with, or kids with cerebral palsy. And I just want to add that while the brain damage that is called cerebral palsy in that first year of life may be permanent damage and does not get any worse, it's not a progressive disease. There are associated orthopedic problems and lasting neurological problems like high muscle tone or hypertonicity that are secondary effects of the brain damage, and these are big areas for OT to for intervention. Down at the bottom of page 99 on the right-hand column talks about intervention, and I'll just read right before that title, intervention. The book states, working as part of an interprofessional team is an essential part of occupational practice. This requires clear and respectful communication, teamwork, interpersonal skills, and knowledge of one's professional knowledge of one's profession and that of the other professions. And I think what should be added to that sentence is it also involves knowing when to consult other professions um, and yield to their knowledge base instead of thinking as the OT that you can do just about anything. There's a real need for consultation. Um, Further down toward the end of the page, they begin to write about frames of reference, and they mention the developmental frame of reference, and it's described. Um, the other big frames of reference or approaches, or some people even call them paradigms, um, are biomechanical, which focuses on strength, range of motion, and endurance, and a lot of body factors. The rehabilitation frame of reference, which focuses on rehab and adaptation, adaptive equipment, and working specifically on ADL skills and noticing what needs to be adapted and graded for a person to be able to get back to taking care of themselves, for one thing. And then PEO is another one. That's a model or a conceptual model, and it stands for person, environment, and occupation. And it's very, very OT because it focuses on those three things together. Um, the very last sentence on page 99, going on to page 100, says intervention is, I'll just read again, um, aimed at improving the underlying factors so the infant may perform the desired skill. Um, this is a good example as we start to talk about uh, the framework, the OT framework, that working at this level, there's a need to build up body function and structure, leading to participation or occupational participation. And this would be a good example of a bottom up approach where we start with body structure. The top down approach, which is usually taken in OT, starts at the top um, of role performance, for example, and then works down as far as needed to um, try to um, let's see to try to put together the parts, the tasks, the parts of the activity, and build up to being able to perform an activity independently. And that activity has an association with various roles that the person holds, finally leading to self-efficacy. Um, I think box 11.2 is really important, suggestions when providing home programs. None of these are for memorization, they're just good information. And then right under that box, uh, there's mention of play as the occupation of childhood. And I'll just say it's also the occupation of infancy when we consider play being the main modality within which an infant develops those various motor milestones of, sitting up to first turning um, from prone to supine and supine to prone, sitting up, balancing, and then all fours, and then walking. Box 11.3 is developmental tasks of childhood, so goes through some of the things I just said. And then there's a mention on page 101 of play therapy, and I would say, as much as that might seem intuitive, it's a specialty or a subspecialty of developmental specialists and might be something to consult out for. Okay. Um, Page 102, the bottom of the right-hand column, says school-age children spend a majority of their day in school. Therefore, OT practitioners help children obtain the necessary foundational skills for sitting at a desk, reading, writing, eating in the cafeteria, playing on the playground, and participating in music, gym, and other academic learning. OT services provided in the schools are considered related services. Um, and all of these are delivered in the least restrictive environment. This is a really good nutshell version of OT. And I point it out because so many times you hear that OTs are involved in handwriting in schools. And it's so much more than that. And even an OT that's involved in handwriting would be working with hand strength, dexterity, body image, motor control, all the things that are part of handwriting. And keep in mind that handwriting is not penmanship. Handwriting is forming letters, which involves many, many perceptual motor skills. Okay, so page 104. Again, we're looking at diagnoses and settings. There's one thing in here where on the left-hand column it says OT practitioners work with adolescents in hospitals, day treatment centers, school systems, and rehabilitation centers. Because adolescence is a time of transitions, the OT practitioner may assist adolescents in transitioning to high school or with work readiness, such as vocational rehabilitation. And I just want to point out that this is one area where there's no confusion of what OT does and what PT does because only OT is involved in that area of practice. This is not something PTs are involved in. A little bit further down, it talks about, let's see, finally, adolescents who experience physical disabilities may require special attention to deal with these issues, such as sexuality, body image, and future goals and aspirations. The OT practitioner helps adolescents with all these issues. Excuse me. Not a skill you have when you first graduate. So this, along with things like case management, which some OTs are involved in, a big area for social work, by the way. These skills take time to develop. Okay. Page 108. Page 109. No, I'm sorry, I'm on 106 and 107. Can't quite read it. On page 107, they talk about settings for older adults, and they're primarily talking about skilled nursing facilities in that section. That starts on page 107. So that's it for chapter 11. I'll be making more of these as we go. Make sure to text me. I'm sorry. Make sure to have entries on the discussion board, the general discussion board, if you have any questions about readings. Okay, that's all for now.